One of the most difficult concepts for modern Americans to understand, and one that's really quite essential to understanding the world of the founders, and in particular the period between the American Revolution and the Constitution, is the centrality of the idea of civic virtue. Now, in contemporary America, you have to sort of ask yourself the question, when was the last time you heard someone described as virtuous? It's not a term that we hear a lot in modern America, and indeed, most people, when they would hear the word virtue, would almost certainly tend to think about personal or private virtues. The virtue that we're talking about when we're trying to understand the political and constitutional universe that gave us the American Constitution is a different concept, civic virtue. And it comes to us from a very long tradition going back to ancient Rome, a tradition that the founders were very well aware of. And the idea behind civic virtue is that citizenship has certain obligations that are attached to it. Citizens both enjoy rights and liberties, but they have civic obligations. And among them are the participating in the jury, serving in the militia, and of course, depending on whether or not you are propertied or unpropertied, participating in the political process at the level that the society allows you to participate. So, of course, in the 18th century, we're still dealing with a world where the assumption is the landed interest is different than people without land, and in most of the colonies, and certainly in most of the states, you have, with the exception of Pennsylvania and Vermont, bicameral, which is to say upper houses and lower houses. To serve in the upper house and to vote for people in the upper house, there's almost always a higher property requirement. And apart from Pennsylvania, virtually all of the other states have some kind of property requirement even to vote for the lower house. Pennsylvania, which is arguably the most democratic of the new states, does away with the property requirement, and it's a tax-paying requirement. Which is quite progressive for its day. So participation in the political process, that's one of the key ideas behind civic virtue. And the other key idea is that you must put the good of the Commonwealth. I mean, Massachusetts this day is still called the Commonwealth, and that idea carries with it the notion of the collective good of the society and the political community. And so the idea is that you as a citizen, and particularly if you're a leader, you must think beyond your own narrow self-interest. You must even think beyond the narrow interest of your community. You must think of the good of the entire political community when you act in a public capacity. Now, in terms of understanding this concept of virtue, as is often the case, there's a kind of balance between virtue on the one hand, which is the value to be encouraged, and corruption, which is the negative opposite of virtue, that is the ever-present danger that republics face. And the founders are very aware, because they've studied the history of Rome, and they have studied the experience of other republican governments, and essentially going back to their studies of Roman history, what they are aware of is that republics are like people, in that they have a cycle of life that they go through. And republics start out young and energetic and vigorous and virtuous. They become wealthy and perhaps a little complacent in middle age. And at the end, they become corrupt and weak, and invariably they perish. So what the founders are deeply aware of and very concerned about is, can we build a republic that will stand the test of time? Will we fall the way Rome fell? Will we find some way to actually beat the clock, as it were? Because they're very aware that there's been no successful republican government that has ultimately stood the test of time. Now, if you think about it, the Massachusetts Constitution, which is 1780, it's not one of the first constitutions of the period. It's actually one of the last of the Revolutionary era. The Massachusetts Constitution is the oldest continuously functioning constitution in the world. The second oldest, of course, is the United States Constitution. Now, of course, both of those have had changes, but the fundamental framework that they set up continues to define our political and legal system. And in that sense, of course, what the founders did is generally credited to be a great success. Obviously, in contemporary America, we have some concerns that there are some dysfunctions, there's gridlock, there are some concerns that maybe some of the customs that have developed in the Senate, for instance, may be subverting the founders' vision of what the Senate was supposed to accomplish. Certainly they did not expect political parties when they wrote the Constitution, and the fact that political parties have been with us for a very long time indeed, the system has had to adapt to that. And of course, we no longer have property requirements. So we are living in a republic that has been democratized in many ways, and trying to figure out how you make this structure, which was given to us by an 18th century set of leaders, can flourish in the 21st century is, of course, what the problem that we as Americans face today.